Close your eyes for just a moment. Imagine yourself sitting in a quiet room where the soft breeze drifts through an open window, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. Perhaps a candle flickers gently nearby, its golden light casting a warm glow across the walls. Outside, leaves rustle softly, as if nature itself is whispering a story waiting to be told. In this calm setting, I invite you to join me on a journey, one that is both unusual and fascinating. Our story tonight is about one of history's most curious figures, the bearded woman. For centuries, people have whispered, written, and gossiped about individuals who blurred the lines of what society called normal. In an age when appearances mattered so much, when people were judged, celebrated, or even mocked based on how they looked, the presence of a woman with a full beard became more than just a physical trait. It became a legend. But who was the very first bearded woman in history? And what did her story mean in the context of the time she lived in? To answer this question, we must step back far into the dusty corridors of history and trace the earliest records of women whose appearance challenged expectations, curiosity, and myth. Before fact, before written records, many cultures carried stories of unusual individuals, people who stood apart because of physical traits that seemed extraordinary. In ancient folklore, some cultures saw bearded women as omens, symbols of power, or even punishments from the gods. In others, they were seen as divine or mystical, carrying hidden wisdom. The Greeks, for example, loved telling stories of transformations, men turning into women, women turning into men, gods changing forms at will. Within their myths, a woman with a beard might not have been seen as strange at all, but rather as touched by the divine. Similarly, in medieval Europe, chroniclers sometimes described bearded women as signs of nature's rebellion, as if the natural order itself was speaking. But myths only give us shadows. To find the first real bearded woman we can point to, a living, breathing human, we must turn to early written accounts where scribes, priests, and physicians recorded what they considered remarkable. The case of bearded women in antiquity. The earliest known mention of bearded women appears in texts from the Roman Empire. Ancient writers occasionally described women who grew facial hair, usually framing them as medical curiosities or freaks of nature. Roman doctors like Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, noted unusual human traits, including women who sprouted beards late in life. In most of these cases, such women were not celebrated but hidden, their existence used to warn or shock. Yet even here, their stories endured. Why? Because anything that broke the boundaries of gender and expectation became unforgettable. By the Middle Ages, reports of bearded women had grown more frequent. Travelers' tales, medical notes, and church records all preserve scattered accounts. Most were shrouded in judgment, for in a deeply religious society, a bearded woman was often seen as unnatural, sometimes even cursed. But there are exceptions. Enter the first names in history. The earliest named bearded women come from around the 15th and 16th centuries, when chroniclers began to attach identities to these women. One such figure was Patris Gonsalvus's daughter, remembered from the late 1500s. Gonsalvus himself was born with hypertrichosis, a rare condition that covered his body with hair. He became famous in European courts, and his children inherited this unusual trait. Among them were daughters whose faces were partly covered in hair, leading to comparisons with men or beasts. While they were not bearded in the traditional sense, these women became part of the fascination with wonders of nature that swept through Renaissance Europe. However, the first fully documented case of a woman with a beard, recognized and named as such, was Magdalena Ventura, a 17th-century Italian woman who became known as the Bearded Lady of Abruzzo. In 1631, she sat for a remarkable portrait by the painter Giuseppe de Ribera. The painting shows Magdalena as a tall, commanding figure dressed in black, her beard full and flowing like that of a nobleman. In her arms, she holds her baby, as her husband stands quietly in the shadows behind her. This painting stunned Europe. It was not only proof of her existence, but also a challenge to conventional ideas of femininity. To many, Magdalena symbolized the mysterious will of God. Why should a woman carry the beard of a man and yet still bear children? For others, she was a marvel, living proof that nature did not always obey rules. Bearded women as public figures. From this point on, the image of the bearded woman began to shift. Instead of being hidden, many became public figures. By the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in Europe and America, bearded women were no longer only medical curiosities, they were stars. Some traveled with circuses, some sat for royal courts, and others became the subjects of pamphlets and broadsheets. The candle still flickers beside us, its flame steady but alive, much like the curiosity of humankind. We now step into the Renaissance and early modern period, a time when the world was opening wider than ever before. New lands were being mapped, new plants and animals were cataloged, and science was beginning to challenge old dogmas. And within this swirl of discovery, unusual human bodies, including the bearded woman, became objects of fascination, debate, and sometimes exploitation, a world hungry for wonders during the Renaissance. Europeans had an insatiable appetite for marvels. Ships returning from the Americas or Asia brought not only spices and gold, but also stories of strange creatures and monstrous races. Collectors across Europe began filling cabinets of curiosity. Wooden chests or elaborate rooms filled with seashells, fossils, taxidermy, and anything that appeared unusual. In this environment, the bearded woman was not just a person. She was a living wonder. Unlike a fossilized bone or a preserved insect, she could walk into a royal court, speak, and challenge assumptions simply by existing. The most striking example of this era is, once again, Magdalena Ventura of Abruzzo, whose 1631 portrait still takes our breath away. Commissioned by the Duke of Alcala, her image was painted by Giuseppe de Ribera, a master of realism. The painting was more than art. It was evidence. For nobles who collected curiosities, a portrait like this became as valuable as a rare gemstone. Ribera painted Magdalena with solemn dignity. Her dark beard flows down her chest, while in her arms she cradles her child. The symbolism was powerful. Here was a woman whose body defied categories, combining the masculine beard with the feminine role of motherhood. For some viewers, she embodied divine mystery. For others, she was a riddle that even science could not solve. The role of medicine and early science as the Renaissance blended into the scientific revolution. Physicians took a stronger interest in explaining unusual bodies. The bearded woman was no longer seen only as a miracle or curse, but also as a medical case. Early doctors believed bearded women were the result of imbalances in the body's humors, the ancient Greek idea that health depended on a balance of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. A woman with a beard, they claimed, must have had an excess of heat or male qualities in her body. Other physicians speculated about fertility. Some argued that women with beards were less likely to bear children because their bodies were becoming too masculine. Magdalena Ventura shattered this theory, as her child in Ribera's portrait proved. But the debate continued for centuries. These medical writings reveal something important. Society was trying to categorize and control what it did not understand. Instead of simply accepting that human bodies are diverse, doctors tried to force unusual individuals into neat boxes of explanation. The stage of curiosity, by the late Renaissance, bearded women began to step into the public sphere in new ways. Wealthy courts invited them to appear at banquets and gatherings. Pamphlets and broadsheets circulated their images, often paired with sensational text, describing them as wonders of nature. One figure who gained renown was Barbara Urslerin, a German woman born in 1629 with hypertrichosis. Her entire body, including her face, was covered with hair. Barbara became a sensation in Europe, traveling across courts and cities as a living marvel. Unlike Magdalena Ventura, who was remembered through a solemn portrait, Barbara's fame was more like that of a performer. People paid to see her. Barbara's story also highlights how women with unusual traits often had little choice in how they were displayed. Many were taken under the protection of noble families or traveling showmen who made money from their appearances. Though they gained fame, their lives were often controlled by others. Religion, morality, and judgment at the same time, religious interpretations never fully disappeared. In deeply Catholic regions of Europe, bearded women were sometimes viewed as warnings from God, examples of sin, imbalance, or divine punishment. In Protestant lands, they were more often framed as natural oddities, lessons in the strange diversity of God's creation. Yet there is evidence that ordinary people often reacted with simple curiosity, even sympathy. Imagine yourself in a small village where life was repetitive and news traveled slowly. Then, one day, a traveling show arrives, and among the performers is a woman with a full beard. For villagers who had never left their town, such a sight was unforgettable. They might have whispered, gossiped, or even mocked. But they would also have remembered her for years afterward. The symbol of the bearded woman by the end of the Renaissance. The bearded woman had become more than an individual, she was a symbol. To some, she represented divine mystery. To others, she was proof of science's unfinished explanations. And to many ordinary people, she was simply unforgettable. A human being whose presence could not be ignored. It is striking how much their images were preserved. While countless ordinary women of the 16th and 17th centuries were forgotten, the bearded women of this era live on in portraits, pamphlets, and medical texts. Their difference gave them a strange kind of immortality. The glow of the candle deepens, and the shadows it casts remind us of theater curtains drawing open. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the stage, both literal and metaphorical, became the setting for the bearded woman. This was the age of grand circuses, traveling sideshows, and public exhibitions. Ordinary people could now pay a small fee to encounter the wonders of nature that had once been reserved only for kings, dukes, and physicians. And among these wonders, the bearded woman became a star. The rise of sideshows. As cities expanded and industrialization reshaped society, leisure and entertainment transformed. In both Europe and America, fairs and carnivals drew huge crowds. These gatherings were filled with music, rides, games of chance, and exhibitions of human oddities. Showmen recognized that people were endlessly fascinated by what defied expectation. They labeled their performers human curiosities, or freaks of nature. Posters plastered on walls promised astonishing sights. Giants towering over ordinary men, conjoined twins, tattooed savages from distant lands, and, of course, women with full beards. These shows offered working-class families affordable entertainment, but they also gave audiences something deeper, the thrill of confronting the extraordinary. The bearded woman embodied this perfectly, both familiar and strange, human yet wondrous. Bearded women in the 18th century, by the late 1700s, the bearded woman was firmly established as a fixture in public exhibitions. Travelers' diaries and advertisements from this period describe women presented to paying audiences, often alongside other wonders. One well-known figure was Josephine Clofulia of Switzerland. Born in 1827, she became famous for her thick beard, which she began growing at age 8. Josephine was taken to Paris and displayed in exhibitions before eventually traveling to the United States. Her refined manners and elegant dress contrasted with her beard, creating a spectacle that delighted audiences. Josephine became so well known that she was even brought to court in the U.S., not for a crime, but because some accused her of being a disguised man. The judge, after hearing testimony and examining records, confirmed she was indeed a woman. This courtroom drama only fueled her fame, proving how much fascination and controversy a bearded woman could generate. The 19th century, the age of Barnum, the 19th century was truly the golden age of the sideshow, thanks in large part to P.T. Barnum, the master showman of America. Barnum understood publicity better than anyone, and he knew that the bearded woman was one of the most reliable attractions for drawing a crowd. Perhaps the most famous of all was Annie Jones. Born in Virginia in 1865. Annie's face was covered in hair from infancy, and Barnum quickly recruited her for his traveling show. Billed as the Bearded Lady, Annie spent her life touring the United States and Europe. Unlike many performers, she embraced the role and used it to gain financial independence. Annie dressed elegantly, often in gowns that highlighted her femininity, making the contrast with her beard all the more striking. Photographs of her circulated widely, and she became one of the best-known circus performers of her time. Importantly, Annie fought against the degrading label of freak. She insisted on being treated with dignity and spoke publicly about the humanity of sideshow performers. In this way, she was not only a star but also a pioneer in defending the rights of those exploited by the entertainment. Industry exploitation and agency. It's important to note that not every bearded woman found empowerment in fame. For many, life in the circus or sideshow was harsh. Performers were often treated as property, controlled by managers or showmen who kept most of the profits. Yet, paradoxically, the stage also offered opportunities unavailable elsewhere. In a society where women had limited economic freedom, becoming a bearded lady could provide income, travel, and independence. Some performers married within the circus community, finding solidarity with others who also lived outside society's norms. This tension between exploitation and agency defined much of the 19th century experience for bearded women. They were objects of spectacle, but they were also individuals with voices, desires, and ambitions. Cultural meaning in the 19th century. By this time, the bearded woman had become more than just a curiosity. She was a cultural phenomenon. Newspapers published stories about them, often mixing admiration with sensationalism. Photographs, which were now widely available, allowed their images to circulate far beyond the tent. For audiences, the bearded woman challenged rigid ideas of gender. In an era when men and women were expected to look and behave in very specific ways, a woman with a beard blurred the lines. Some viewers were shocked, others intrigued, and some even attracted. In this way, the bearded woman pushed society to confront uncomfortable questions about identity, sexuality, and what it means to be normal. The warm glow of our imagined candle now flickers against the backdrop of the 20th century, an era of rapid transformation. The world was gripped by wars, new technologies, and profound social change. For the bearded woman, this century brought both decline and reinvention. Once celebrated as stars of the circus tent, they were increasingly drawn into debates about medicine, gender identity, and cultural norms. The decline of the traveling sideshow. The early decades of the 20th century marked the beginning of the end for the traditional sideshow. Audiences that once flocked to carnivals and circuses were now captivated by cinema, radio, and later television. The bearded woman, once a guaranteed attraction, was no longer the centerpiece of mass entertainment. World War I also disrupted popular amusements. With so much human suffering and devastation, curiosity shows seemed trivial, even cruel. By the 1920s and 1930s, many sideshows closed, and performers struggled to find work. For bearded women, the spotlight grew dimmer, the rise of science and medicine. At the same time, science began to claim what the circus had lost. Advances in endocrinology and genetics offered new explanations for female facial hair. Doctors studied conditions such as hirsutism and polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, while other cases were linked to congenital adrenal hyperplasia or even tumors. Medical journals sometimes featured case studies of women with beards. These reports were clinical, stripping away the mystique that had once surrounded them in posters and sideshow tents. The bearded woman became less of a spectacle and more of a patient, her story rewritten through the lens of biology. Yet this shift carried its own problems. While science demystified the phenomenon, it also pathologized it, framing the bearded woman as someone abnormal or disordered. What had once been a source of livelihood and fame was now treated as a symptom to be cured. The impact of feminism. The 20th century also saw the rise of feminism, which reshaped conversations about beauty, gender roles, and identity. The suffragette movement in the early decades, followed by second-wave feminism in the 1960s and 1970s, directly challenged rigid definitions of femininity. For some feminists, the bearded woman became a powerful symbol. She represented defiance against narrow beauty standards and the policing of women's bodies. Writers and activists pointed out that society's obsession with hair removal, shaving, waxing, and laser treatments was itself a form of control over women. Artists and performers began reclaiming the image of the bearded woman, turning it from a freak show attraction into an emblem of resistance. Photographs, stage performances, and avant-garde art projects celebrated her as an icon of strength rather than an object of ridicule. Bearded women. During and after the World Wars, the two World Wars reshaped everything, including how unusual physical traits were perceived. In the chaos of battle and the aftermath of destruction, the spectacle of the circus seemed less relevant. People were more concerned with survival and rebuilding lives. But the wars also encouraged new migrations and cultural exchanges. Performers who had once been confined to Europe or America sometimes found audiences abroad. In countries recovering from devastation, the sight of a bearded woman was both exotic and oddly comforting, a reminder that humanity still contained mystery. After World War II, however, the dominance of Hollywood and television changed popular entertainment forever. The carefully crafted glamour of actresses like Marilyn Monroe or Audrey Hepburn set new ideals for femininity. In this polished world, the bearded woman no longer fit easily. She was erased from the mainstream stage, pushed to the margins where alternative performance art, underground communities, and feminist movements kept her memory alive. Cultural reinterpretations in the mid-late 20th century, by the 1960s and 1970s, the counterculture challenged everything mainstream society upheld. In this atmosphere, the bearded woman resurfaced as a statement rather than a curiosity. Artists and activists staged performances where women donned fake beards to question gender expectations. Drag culture embraced the look, blending masculinity and femininity with creativity and pride. Meanwhile, academic interest grew. Scholars of gender studies and sociology began analyzing the historical role of the bearded woman. They asked, what does it mean that society once paid to gawk at her? What does her existence reveal about power, beauty, and control? The answers were complex but profound. The bearded woman was no longer just a performer or a patient. She was a mirror reflecting the anxieties and desires of her time. The candlelight that has guided us across centuries now glows against a modern backdrop, no longer flickering in stone halls or circus tents, but reflecting off smartphone screens and glowing billboards. We have entered the 21st century, a time when the bearded woman is no longer confined to dusty sideshows or hidden in medical journals. Instead, she walks boldly into mainstream culture, social media, and the very heart of debates on gender, beauty, and identity. Breaking free from the past, the early 2000s brought a cultural shift. Where the 20th century often viewed bearded women as medical anomalies or historical curiosities, the 21st century increasingly embraced them as symbols of authenticity and self-expression. This was not an overnight change. For decades, women with facial hair had hidden in silence, pressured by beauty standards to shave, bleach, or conceal. But as conversations about body positivity and gender diversity gained momentum, bearded women began stepping into the light with pride. No longer passive subjects of curiosity, they became active voices shaping their own narratives. Harnum Kaur, a modern icon among the most famous figures of our time, is Harnum Kaur, a British woman who has polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, a condition that caused her to grow a full beard. In her youth, she endured bullying and ridicule, even contemplating despair. But instead of hiding, she chose to embrace her beard as part of her identity. Harnum became a motivational speaker, model, and activist, using her platform to challenge narrow definitions of beauty. She even walked the runway at London Fashion Week, stunning the world with her confidence. Her message resonates powerfully. True beauty lies not in conforming, but in embracing one's uniqueness. Harnum transformed what had once been treated as a problem into a banner of empowerment. The role of social media, the rise of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube gave bearded women unprecedented platforms. Unlike the past, when their images were controlled by showmen, photographers, or medical researchers, they could now present themselves on their own terms. On social media, bearded women post selfies, share personal stories, and connect with others facing similar experiences. Hashtags like bearded lady, body positivity, and PCOS awareness amplify their voices, turning what once isolated them into a global community. Importantly, social media also humanizes their stories. Viewers no longer see them as distant curiosities behind glass or posters, but as relatable individuals, friends, sisters, mothers, living ordinary and extraordinary lives. Challenging gender norms. The 21st century is also an era of expanding gender conversations. Non-binary and transgender communities have pushed society to rethink the boundaries of male and female. Within this dialogue, the bearded woman occupies a unique position. Her presence blurs lines. She embodies femininity through her identity and masculinity through her appearance. For some, she sparks discomfort, but for others, she offers liberation. The bearded woman becomes a living challenge to the rigid binary, showing that human identity is far more fluid than history once allowed. Artists, drag performers, and activists frequently draw inspiration from her image, celebrating her as a symbol of self-definition. In queer communities, she is admired as a figure who refuses to conform, standing proudly in the face of judgment. Medical awareness and representation science, too, has evolved. While earlier centuries reduced the bearded woman to a case study, today's medical discourse is more nuanced. Conditions like PCOS are now better understood, and campaigns raise awareness about their physical and emotional impact. At the same time, modern medicine emphasizes choice. Women may choose treatments like laser therapy if they wish to remove facial hair, but many also choose acceptance. The key difference is agency. The decision now lies with the individual, not society's demands. Representation in media reflects this progress. Documentaries, photo essays, and even advertising campaigns have featured bearded women not as oddities, but as empowered individuals. Some fashion brands have included them in campaigns to promote inclusivity, a move unthinkable just a generation ago. The bearded woman as a symbol in today's world. The bearded woman is more than a person, she is a symbol of resilience against ridicule, a symbol of defiance against beauty standards, a symbol of the right to exist authentically in one's own skin. From viral TED Talks to magazine covers, from grassroots social media posts to art galleries, her image radiates a message. Diversity is not something to be hidden, but celebrated. The candlelight now burns with a steady but uneasy glow, as if reflecting the contradictions of our age. We live in a world that celebrates diversity more openly than ever, yet one where judgment and stigma still cast long shadows. For the bearded woman, the 21st century offers empowerment, visibility, and community, but also new battles. Her story today is not only about history or spectacle, but about the very real struggles of identity, prejudice, and belonging. The weight of stigma. Despite the progress of body positivity and gender inclusivity, stigma surrounding women with facial hair remains deeply rooted. In everyday life, bearded women often endure stares, whispers, or outright ridicule. Strangers take photographs without permission or make cruel comments online. Children, unfiltered in their curiosity, may point or ask questions in public. Adults, conditioned by centuries of rigid beauty standards, may react with discomfort or even hostility. For many, the pressure to conform is overwhelming. Razors, waxing, laser treatments, and medications become routine attempts to erase what society deems unnatural. The emotional toll can be heavy. Feelings of shame, anxiety, or isolation often accompany these struggles. This reality reveals that while history has moved forward, old prejudices remain alive. The question of identity. For the bearded woman, identity is not always simple. She must navigate the delicate intersection of biology, culture, and self-expression. Is she defined by her condition, such as PCOS, or by the beard itself? Does she identify simply as a woman with unique features, or does her beard push her into broader conversations about gender diversity? Some embrace their facial hair as part of their femininity, challenging the world to expand its definitions. Others see it as a burden, something they would prefer to erase if given the choice. Neither path is wrong, for the true power lies in autonomy. Yet the pressure of external expectations makes this autonomy difficult. Society often demands that she justify her appearance, explain her choices, or educate others about her existence. The weight of constantly defending one's identity can be exhausting. Mental health struggles studies show that women with conditions leading to facial hair often experience higher rates of depression and anxiety. This is not because of the hair itself, but because of the reactions it provokes. Bullying in childhood, rejection in adolescence, and judgment in adulthood leave lasting scars. The constant message that to be feminine is to be hairless creates an impossible standard. Even when surrounded by supportive friends or communities, the echoes of ridicule can linger. Some women find empowerment in advocacy, transforming pain into purpose. Others retreat into silence, hidden behind endless routines of hair removal. Both paths tell us something important. The world still has far to go in creating spaces of acceptance. Employment and social barriers. Appearance plays a powerful role in professional and social opportunities. A woman with a beard may face challenges in the workplace, where professionalism is often tied to traditional grooming standards. Job interviews may end with polite rejections, while promotions may pass silently to others. In social settings, dating and relationships carry added layers of complexity. While some partners celebrate uniqueness, others allow prejudice to dictate attraction. These barriers echo those faced by bearded women in history, once confined to sideshows for survival, now navigating subtler but equally limiting walls of discrimination. The digital age, a double-edged sword. The internet has amplified both visibility and vulnerability. On one hand, platforms like Instagram and TikTok have given bearded women global platforms to inspire and connect. Stories of empowerment spread quickly, encouraging others to embrace themselves. But the same platforms host anonymous cruelty. Online trolls leave hateful comments, spread doctored images, or mock publicly visible profiles. Digital spaces that should foster connection can also become battlegrounds of harassment. The bearded woman today must balance courage with caution, knowing that every post invites both admiration and attack. The struggle for belonging at the heart of these challenges lies one universal human need: belonging. The bearded woman, like anyone else, seeks love, community, and respect. Yet she is too often cast as other, caught between fascination and rejection. Still, she persists. Communities of support, both online and offline, have emerged to offer solidarity. Body positivity movements, feminist organizations, and queer spaces provide safe havens where her presence is celebrated rather than questioned. In these spaces, the candle of acceptance burns brightest, pushing back against the shadows of stigma. The crackling hearth we imagined at the beginning of this journey now burns brighter, casting its warm glow not just backward into history, but forward into the horizon of possibility. The story of the bearded woman is no longer bound by the cages of curiosity or the whispers of ridicule. Instead, her narrative points us toward a future where difference is not just tolerated, but celebrated as a vital thread in humanity's ever-growing tapestry. Science and technology. A changing landscape advancements in science and medicine are reshaping the way we understand and experience the human body. For centuries, facial hair on women was seen as a mystery, often explained by superstition or moral judgment. Today, conditions like PCOS, hormonal imbalances, and genetic variations are studied with care and compassion. Future technologies may offer even more nuanced options. Gene therapies, hormone regulation, and advanced cosmetic treatments could give women the ability to control, reduce, or even entirely eliminate facial hair if they choose. At the same time, technologies like AI and social media algorithms are already beginning to amplify voices of diversity, ensuring that the faces once hidden in the shadows can now stand in the spotlight. Yet perhaps the most important innovation lies not in medicine or machines, but in mindsets. Science can change the body, but society must change the way it sees the body. The age of inclusivity. The future belongs to inclusivity. As movements for gender equality, body positivity, and LGBTQ+ rights continue to grow, the definition of beauty expands beyond narrow historical molds. The bearded woman, once a freak for public amusement, is now becoming a symbol of resistance against conformity. Social campaigns celebrating unconventional beauty are already carving space in fashion, art, and entertainment. Runways have featured models with beards, musicians and artists have embraced their facial hair as part of their brand, and activists have claimed space as public voices for acceptance. This cultural shift suggests a future where the bearded woman is not a token or a spectacle, but simply another face in the crowd, unique, yes, but not extraordinary in the sense of being alien. Education and awareness, schools, media, and public health initiatives are increasingly emphasizing awareness about diverse bodies. Instead of children growing up with whispers and giggles about facial hair, future generations may learn from an early age that variation is part of the human story. Documentaries like this one, books, and digital media ensure that the stories of women from the past, those who endured ridicule or profited through spectacle, are not forgotten, but serve as lessons. These stories remind us of how far we've come and how far we must go. Cultural legacy. The legacy of the bearded woman is complex. She was a spectacle in the circus, a subject of art, a curiosity for scholars, and now a voice in activism. In every era, she reflected the values and prejudices of her society. In the future, her legacy may shift from being a symbol of difference to a symbol of human resilience. She embodies the courage to exist openly in a world that often demands conformity. Her beard, once a mark of shame or exoticism, may one day be remembered as a banner of liberation, an emblem of the human right to live authentically, toward a world of belonging. Imagine a world where a bearded woman can walk down the street without a second glance, where children see her and ask no more questions than they would of someone with red hair or green eyes. Imagine a society where her presence in the workplace, on television, or in classrooms is unremarkable, not because she is invisible, but because she is accepted. This is the future we edge toward. Not perfection, not the erasure of difference, but the normalization of it. Closing reflections as our 7-part journey comes to an end. The hearth fire we lit at the beginning has guided us from the distant past to the yet unwritten future. The bearded woman, once locked in sideshows or painted as myth, is now stepping into her rightful place in history, not as a curiosity, but as a person. Her story is more than hair on a face. It is a mirror of how society defines beauty, femininity, and humanity itself. To understand her is to understand the broader struggle for dignity and acceptance that every marginalized group faces. So the next time we see a face that defies expectation, let us not turn away in discomfort or curiosity. Let us instead recognize the legacy, the resilience, and the simple truth that to be human is to be varied. And in that variety lies our greatest strength. The flame flickers once more, not in farewell, but in promise. The story of the bearded woman is not ending. It is still being written by every woman who chooses to live her truth, beard and all.